So, a very good evening to all of you. I'm Dr. Vikram Bhaskar, Assistant Professor, Pediatrics, UCMS and GTB Hospital. So, I'll be talking about COVID in children. So, I usually like to begin with this first slide, as many of the participants are not from pediatric background. So, they must understood this fact that children are not small adults. Right? Now, what do I mean by that? Children are different, not just because they are small in size, but also because their physiology is different. Many of the organ systems are developing as well as their immune system is developing. So they respond very differently to various diseases, unlike their adult counterpart. One more thing which makes children different is that they do not communicate properly. They cannot tell what their symptoms are. So you have to rely on your clinical skills, clinical acumen to diagnose any disease. So with this basic background in mind, I'll start my presentation. So as far as COVID is considered in children, we all know that from the experience of the past two waves, we know that children are somehow less infected. And also whenever they are infected, they tend to have a less severe disease. So it has been seen that children contribute to less than 12% of the global disease burden, despite them being 25 to 30% of the world population. And the reason is that they are less exposed. Unlike adults, they don't have to go out to earn money or to do work. So they are less exposed and hence they are less susceptible as compared to adults. Also, they are less likely to get tested because majority of them are asymptomatic. Now, when these children do get infection, they tend to have a less severe disease. And it has been seen that mortality rates are much lower as compared to adults. It has been seen that COVID-19 contribute to less than 0.5% of all cause deaths in children less than in 7 countries. And what do I mean by that? That still the majority of the deaths in children are due to causes like pneumonia, diarrhea, prematurity, birth asphyxia. So these are still the predominant cause, and COVID-19 has contributed very little to the childhood mortality. And again, the children are unlikely to be super spreaders as compared to their adult counterpart. Now, basically, we can have three kind of scenario whenever we encounter COVID in children. So first is COVID-19 can present as an acute pneumonia. That is the usual presentation. Secondly, it can present as a multi-system inflammatory syndrome in children, or commonly called MIS-C. So this is a very rare complication, but is particularly present in children, not seen in adults. It can be life-threatening and usually present with shock, cardiac failure, rashes, etc. And it can occur up to 3 months after the COVID illness. So it's a post-COVID syndrome. A third common scenario which has been seen in pediatric age group is the neonates who are born to either COVID positive or a COVID suspected mother. So talking about the first scenario, that is the acute COVID illness, majority of the children are asymptomatic. So 50 to 60% will not manifest any symptom. However, if they do present with some symptoms, then the common manifestations are fever, URI symptoms like cough, sore throat and runny nose. They may present with abdominal symptoms like diarrhea, vomiting, abdominal pain. Very rarely, some children may complain of headache, myalgias and irritability. Unlike adults, there is very less reporting of loss of smell and taste sensation. Now, when should we test a child for COVID-19 in a children? So basically, it depends upon the epidemiology and prevalence of infection. If the prevalence of the disease is high, then any child who presents with following symptoms should get tested. So any child who presents with fever and the URI symptoms like cough, coryza, sore throat should get tested. Any child who presents with even abdominal symptoms like diarrhea, vomiting, abdominal pain should be kept as a suspected COVID case. Very young infant may present with non-specific symptoms like poor feeding. Loss of taste or smell is rare, but children who are more than 8 years of age may present with these symptoms as well. Asymptomatic children who has a history of close contact with the household should get also tested for COVID-19. And then the children who are in a post-COVID stage, who presents with rash, conjunctival congestion, mucositis or shock, they should get tested for their antibody levels. Now, how to test? So the testing strategy is slightly different in children as compared to adults. I have two videos for you. So one by one, we'll watch both videos and then I'll discuss.
Step 1. Wear appropriate PPE. Step 2. Ensure the patient is in a secure position, preferably on a parent's lap. I like to instruct the parents to position one arm across the infant's arms and the other hand on the infant's forehead. Step 3. Using a tongue depressor, insert the swab to the back of the throat whilst avoiding the tongue. Step 4. Maintaining a secure hold and using the same swab, insert about 1 centimetre or the tip of the swab into one nostril, rotate a few times, then repeat on the other nostril. Finally, ensure the sample is correctly labelled with patient information prior to sending to the lab.
So you may have noticed there are some changes as compared to adult. Have a look at the second video and then I'll talk.
This is Nicole. She's a nurse at BC Children's Hospital, and she's going to show you everything you need to know about how we do a test for COVID-19.
Hi there. First, I always put on protective clothing like a mask, plastic eye shield, and yellow gown to keep everyone safe from germs. For your test, you might sit on your mom or dad's lap, unless you're a big kid. Then you might sit on a chair or exam table. I'll need to put this small swab into your nose. Can you see how skinny it is? It's specially designed to check for a virus that might be way at the back of your nose. You'll need to hold your chin up so the swab can reach the back of your nose. Mom, dad, or another grown-up might need to help you keep still during your test. You might like to plan what you want to do with your hands. Some kids like to hold a squishy ball or their favorite stuffed animal, or you might like to hold your parents' hands. I'll need to measure from your nose to your ear to know how far the swab needs to go inside. By the time you count slowly to 5, the test should be over. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's it. Some kids say their eyes water and their nose feels warm or tinkly when they have this test, kind of like when you get water up your nose or when you drink a really fizzy drink. And just so you know, having the test doesn't mean you have the virus. We may call your parents later with the test results.
Thank you for helping us find out why you're feeling sick. Bye!
So you must have noticed two changes. The first thing is that child need to be restrained properly. The children may not be as cooperative as adults and they tend to move around when you do the sampling. So they need to be restrained properly so as to do not cause them any harm or injury. Second thing is that in first video, you must have noticed that in very young infant, you don't tend to go very deep. So unlike while you do the sampling in adolescents or adult, you tend to go very deep up till the nasopharynx. In very young infant, we tend to avoid that and we don't go that deep to avoid injury to nasal mucosa or even fibriform plate. Now, how do we classify the disease in children? So the disease can be classified into asymptomatic and then mild, moderate and severe disease. So in the mild cases, the children only present with fever and the URI symptoms like sore throat, rhinorrhea, cough, diarrhea and vomiting, but there is no fast breathing. In the moderate diseases, the child presents with fast breathing. Now, how do we define fast breathing? I will discuss in the next slide. Or there is presence of hypoxemia, which means that there is low oxygen concentration in the blood, which can be measured by SpO2, which is 90 to 94% on room air. And there should be no sign of severe disease. Now, what do we mean by severe disease? In severe disease, the child presents with pneumonia and any of the following, like less than 90% saturation in room air, or increased respiratory efforts, or signs of severe respiratory distress like grunting or severe retractions. The child may also present with lethargy, seizures, or somnolence. The child may also complain of severe diarrhea, vomiting, and abdominal pain. The disease may rapidly progress to a critical state, and the child can end up in ARDS, shock, multi-organ dysfunction, or acute thrombosis. Now, when we talk about mild, moderate, severe category of the disease, we talk about fast breathing. Now, fast breathing in infants is age-based. So the younger infants tend to have a faster respiratory rate as compared to their older children. So the cutoffs for various age-based groups is for children less than 2 months, respiratory rate of more than equal to 60 per minute. For 2 to 12 months, it is more than equal to 50 per minute. For 1 to 5 years, it is more than equal to 40 per minute. And for more than 5 years, it is more than equal to 30 per minute. So you have to memorize this cutoff to classify a child whether he is having a faster respiratory rate or not. Now have a look at this video and try to identify for yourself whether you can identify whether the child is having chest indrawing or chest retractions or not. So have a look at these videos and see for yourself if you are able to correctly identify which child is having respiratory distress.
In this section,
Child is not.
we will practice identifying the presence of chest indrawing in 5 children. Here is the first child. Her name is Mary. Does Mary have chest indrawing?
So you can clearly see the child is very calm. There is no use of any accessory muscle. You can see that chest wall and abdomen, they both are moving simultaneously and very quietly. There is no indrawing of the chest wall.
What did you decide? We saw normal breathing. As the child breathed in, the whole chest wall and abdomen moved out. Therefore, we decided that there was no chest indrawing. Here is the second child. Her name is Jenna. Does Jenna have chest indrawing?
Now compare this child to the previous child. You can see that this child clearly looks into respiratory distress. Just notice this indrawing of the chest wall, both in the intercostal and the subcostal region. Also, the respiratory rate is.
What did you decide? We saw indrawing movement in the lower chest wall here, while the rest of the chest and abdomen were moving out. Therefore, we decided that Jenna does have chest indrawing. Here is the third child. His name is Ho. Does Ho have chest indrawing?
So again, if you look at this child, there is definite chest indrawing, right? If you see in this area, with each respiratory effort, the chest wall is getting sucked in, right? So this child is also having subcostal retractions.
What did you decide? We saw indrawing movement in the lower chest wall here, while the rest of the chest and abdomen were moving out. Therefore, we decided that Ho does have chest indrawing.
There is another video for you.
Nah, he don't.
Have a look at this video. So what did you notice? So this child is also having chest wall indrawing. Along with that, with each inspiratory effort, this child is also having a noise. So that noisy breathing is called stridor. So the purpose of showing this video is that if you look at the child without uncovering the child may look very comfortable or the calm or even playful to you. But when you uncover the child, you may notice that the child is having retractions and there is an inspiratory sound. Sometimes you may need to use your stethoscope to hear this sound. So the purpose is that Whenever you have to identify a child who is having or who is suspected to have respiratory distress, you must do three things. You have to expose the child and count the respiratory rate for full 1 minute. Then only you will be able to know whether the child is having tachypnea or fast respiratory rate or not. Second, you have to look for chest indrawing from various angles. And third, you must try to document the saturation. So if you do these three things, I'm sure you will be able to identify any child who is having respiratory distress. So once we have identified the children who are having respiratory distress, once we have tested them, now we come to the clinical management of COVID in children. So the management is category wise. So for asymptomatic patients, we don't need to admit them. They can be easily managed at their home, where they can be under their care of their parents or the local guardians. Also, no investigation is required in these cases. The child continue to have medications for other diseases. If the child is already having some medications for like epilepsy or some chronic condition, they continue to take those medications. Also, COVID appropriate behavior is to be promoted in these kind of children who are staying at home. So they should wear masks. They should follow strict hand hygiene and physical distancing. And the intake of oral fluids should be encouraged. And the older children should be advised and the family should be advised to stay connected and engage in positive talks through phone or video call, etc. Now, the children who are having mild disease, now mild disease where they are having mild symptoms like fever or the URI symptom, they can also be managed at home or in a COVID care centers if the family is very apprehensive. Again, no major investigations or no investigations are required in these patients. Treatment is given only symptomatic, and for fever, you can advise them paracetamol, which is the safest drug to be used in children, in a dose of 10 to 15 mg per kg per dose. It may be repeated every 4 to 6 hourly if the child is having repeated episodes of fever or the continuous fever. For cough, you can prescribe them some throat soothing agents or the warm saline gargles. Again, rest of the management is quite similar to the we discussed in as asymptomatic cases, which means that they need to be monitored carefully. The fluid balance has to be maintained. The point to be noted is, though these patients are having fever, no antimicrobial should be prescribed to them. Fever is one of the common manifestation of the COVID-19 and it does not require any antimicrobial prescription. Now, what do we do in moderate disease? Now, it is the moderate disease when the child is started having signs of respiratory distress and hypoxemia. So, low blood oxygen levels are there. So, these type of children should be admitted in a dedicated COVID health center or a COVID-19 hospital. And oxygen is the mainstay of treatment. These children should be provided oxygen to maintain an SpO2 of 94 to 96%. If they have a documented wheezing, then these children should also be prescribed bronchodilators, and the choice is always MDI over nebulization. Again, these children should not be prescribed any antibiotics. So no empirical antimicrobials for them. You can add antimicrobials only if there is a very strong clinical suspicion or there is a documented evidence of a bacterial infection. Basic investigations like CBC, including ESR, blood glucose, and chest X-ray may be ordered on a case-to-case basis. There is no role of systemic steroids in moderate cases. However, if the cases are rapidly progressive, then you may consider steroid on a case-to-case basis. Again, fluid and electrolyte balance have to be maintained, and the oral intake is very poor, then you can start IV fluid in these children. Remdesivir is not recommended in children due to lack of data related to safety and efficacy. So remdesivir has no role in children so far. Again, CT chest is not indicated and it can be considered on a case-to-case basis if the child is not responding appropriately to your management. Now we come to severe disease. So all patients who are having COVID-19 severe pneumonia should be admitted in an ICU or a high dependence unit of a COVID-19 hospital. Some additional investigation apart from the basic investigations are needed. So you can order CBC, blood glucose, CRP, procalcitonin, LFT, KFT, D-dimer, chest X-ray, maybe CT chest also. Now oxygen therapy is again an integral part of the management, and you should provide oxygen to maintain an SpO2 of 94 to 96%. It can be provided through nasal prong, face mask, HFNC or NIV. We'll discuss in detail regarding this oxygen therapy. Fluid therapy should be given to maintain fluid and electrolyte balance. Again, antimicrobials are only to be given if there is a strong suspicion of bacterial infection or there is a documented bacterial infection. Corticosteroids need to be given in these children. So here comes the role of steroids. So any case who is having severe manifestation of COVID-19 infection, you can start corticosteroids in them. Again, remdesivir is not indicated. Ventilation and organ support may be required on an individual basis. A strict monitoring chart to be maintained in ICU whenever these children get admitted, and hourly monitoring should be done. Now we come to the second presentation. So the second presentation which we can have in children is MIS-C or multi-system inflammatory syndrome in children. Now this complication is rare, but it is a life-threatening complication. So it's a post-COVID syndrome. Once the COVID is over, then after that, after 2 to 6 weeks, or maybe up to even after 3 months, the child may present with this syndrome, commonly called as MIS-C. So the median age group is 7 to 10 years. Children from 5 to 15 years may present with this syndrome. Now, when the children do present with this syndrome, most of them have already become negative for RT-PCR. But if you test them for antibody, their antibodies are positive. So the disease usually resembles like Kawasaki disease, which is already a well-known disease in children, or toxic shock syndrome. The good thing is that prompt recognition and management is associated with an excellent outcome in these children. So what are the common manifestations? The children presents with fever, which is a mandatory criteria. So all of them have fever, and it usually lasts for more than 3 days. They may present with some neurological signs like neuropsychiatric behavior, seizures, headache. Most of them have non-purulent conjunctivitis. They have mucocutaneous involvement in the form of red cracked lips, hand and lip edema. Then majority of them, around 80% of them, may present with gastrointestinal signs like abdominal pain, diarrhea, vomiting. Cardiac involvement may be there, which is the most life-threatening feature. And there can be pericarditis in almost 25% of the cases, and almost 50% of them may present with myocarditis. So what is the diagnostic criteria? So fever is a mandatory criteria. It must be present for more than 3 days, and any two of the following 5 criteria should be present. So there is rash or bilateral non-purulent conjunctivitis or mucocutaneous inflammatory signs. There could be hypotension or shock. There could be features of myocardial dysfunction or pericarditis. There is evidence of coagulopathy, which can be documented by elevated PT-PTTK or D-dimer levels. Then some children may present with acute gastrointestinal problems like diarrhea, vomiting, or abdominal pain. Now, along with this clinical feature, there should be lab evidence. So in laboratory evidence, we must have the features like elevated ESR or C-reactive protein or procalcitonin. And also, there should be no other obvious explanation for these symptoms. So in our country, in a tropical country like India, there is still other infections are present, and we should rule out those infections, and then only we should make a diagnosis of MIS-C. So enteric fever, UTI, bacterial sepsis must be ruled out. Also, you must have a documented evidence of preceding COVID-19 infection, which may be in the form of preceding RT-PCR positive test or a COVID antibody test positive. Now, what is the line of management for these children? So, any children who present with the criteria which we have discussed in the previous slide, then we should evaluate them properly in a stepwise manner. So, the children who are presenting with acute shock-like state, then there is no time to evaluate, and you simultaneously do tier 1 and tier 2 tests. Now, what are these tier 1 and tier 2 tests? So, tier 1 tests are some basic tests like CBC, LFT, KFT, CRP, ESR, and RT-PCR and COVID serology. While in tier 2 investigation, we have some advanced investigation like ECG, echocardiogram, BNP, inflammatory markers like procalcitonin, ferritin, PT-APTT, D-dimers level. So we don't need to do all of these tests at one go. If the child is relatively stable and does not have manifestations like shock or life-threatening manifestation, then we can slowly do a tier 1 evaluation first. And if these investigations are positive, then we can go ahead with tier 2 investigation. But if the child is critically sick, then we simultaneously do both the investigation and start managing the child. How do we manage the child? So again, MISC presents with a spectrum of manifestation where the child can present without shock, so have a mild disease. Then they present with a moderate disease where they have present with Kawasaki type phenotype, or they can present with severe manifestation of MISC where they'll end up in shock or MODS or multi-organ dysfunction syndrome. So in mild cases, you only need to treat them with IV steroids. So the drug of choice is IV methylprednisolone, which is given at a dose of 1 to 2 milligram per kg per day. If the children are having moderate disease, then along with steroid, you also tend to give them IVIG at the rate of 2 gram per kg. And it is given rapidly. So in case of IVIG, this is considered to be a very rapid infusion. So you are giving it over a period of 12 to 16 hours. Right. Now the treatment remains the same with MISC when it presents in the severe manifestation of shock or MODS. Then also you tend to give them IVIG, which is dose again same as moderate disease, 2 gram per kg, given over 12 to 16 hours, along with IV steroids. Now if the child is very critically sick, then empirical antimicrobial should be added as per your hospital policy. If the child do not respond to this treatment, then the dose of steroid can be increased to 10 milligram per kg per day. An echocardiographic or the cardiologist opinion should be taken, and the intensivist should be involved in the care of these children. Now the third scenario which we commonly observed in pediatric age group is the newborn who are born to mothers who are either suspected COVID or COVID positive cases. So the good thing is that the risk to transmission to neonate is very, very low, and the vertical transmission is only documented in less than 2% of the cases. And again, it has been seen that even if the neonates are positive, then most of the manifestation in these neonates are not COVID related, but the outcome depends on the comorbidities like prematurity, birth asphyxia, low birth weight, etc. So the common dictum nowadays is that these babies, if they are stable, they should not be separated from mother, and the breastfeeding should be encouraged with proper COVID appropriate behavior. Now, where these children should be managed? So if the child is stable and term baby, so if the child is more than 34-week gestation and the child is stable and the mother is stable, they should stay together in a well baby ward or the COVID postnatal ward. However, if the baby is sick, then these type of babies should be admitted in the NICU or SNCU. So I have already told you that it is nowadays preferred that mother and baby both are stable, they should room in. So both should stay together. You should encourage breastfeeding, or if it is not possible, then at least expressed breast milk should be given to the neonate. And KMC should be encouraged in case the child is premature or having very low birth weight. So regarding breastfeeding, mother should perform hand hygiene frequently before and after breastfeeding and touching the baby. They should practice respiratory hygiene protocol and wear a mask while breastfeeding and providing care to the baby, and should routinely clean and disinfect various surfaces. If the child is receiving EBM, care should be taken to avoid contamination. So regarding immunization of these babies who are born to COVID positive mothers, so the routine immunization policy is to be followed. So the COVID infection in mother or baby is not a contraindication for your routine immunization. So child should receive his age appropriate immunization. Just one slide about nebulization. Many of these children present with wheezing, and then we need to give them bronchodilators. So it has been recommended to use MDI with spacer whenever there is wheezing. So nebulization is to be discouraged, and it is to be used MDI with spacer. Now finally I will talk about oxygen therapy. Now you all must have seen either in the COVID wards or in the news, this is the common scenario. You see these patients who are requiring various type of oxygen support, various type of oxygen support system you must have already seen. So which system to be used in which patient? So when we talk about oxygen therapy, means we have to treat oxygen as a drug, right? So it is to be given only when there is hypoxia, documented hypoxia, which can easily be measured through a pulse oximeter. So whenever you are providing extra oxygen, so our atmosphere already contains 21% oxygen. So whenever you are providing extra oxygen to correct hypoxia or to prevent hypoxia, then it is called oxygen therapy. Now look at this target. We do not target 99 or 100% of SpO2. That is not our target. Our target is to achieve a safe level of SpO2. So this will save your oxygen and also prevent the deleterious effect of hyperoxia. So oxygen need to be taken as a drug. Both deficiency of oxygen and even excess of oxygen is deleterious to us. Okay, so we have to target an oxygen saturation of 94 to 96% and not 100%. So whenever this patient, so what are the indications of starting oxygen therapy? Whenever the patient is having hypoxemia, or if you want to prevent hypoxemia, you want to reduce work of breathing, decrease work of myocardium, or improve exercise tolerance. What are the oxygen delivery devices which are available to us? So commonly these devices are categorized as low flow and high flow system. So you can just remember that low flow is also the variable performance device. It is, what do we mean by variable performance? So whenever your FiO2 is varying with the patient's respiratory effort, then it becomes a variable performance device. But when the device is continuously delivering a fixed amount of FiO2, then it becomes a high flow or a fixed performance device. So we'll have a look at very commonly used devices in children. The first one is nasal cannula. This is very commonly used. The nasal cannula or the nasal prongs is the other name. It is nothing but a plastic disposable device consisting of two tips of prongs, which are usually 1 centimeter long and connected to an oxygen tubing. Now this is inserted in the vestibule of the nose, and it usually provide an FiO2 of just 24 to 40%. In adults, you can go up to 1 to 6 liter per minute, but in children, you can only go up to 2 liter per minute. So that is a disadvantage. You cannot achieve very high flow with this nasal cannula. Also, if the child is having this nasal cannula, you should provide them a surgical mask or hood to cover so that the risk of aerosolization of the droplet spread is reduced. Now, what are the advantages? Nasal cannula is very easy to fix. It keeps the hand free. The child can have his feet. He can talk. It does not interfere with your airway management. Very low cost. Whenever you are using nasal cannula, your nasopharynx becomes the reservoir, right? But what are the demerits? It is very unstable, very easily dislodged. You cannot give very high flow with the nasal cannula. This becomes very uncomfortable. If you increase the flow in the infant about 2 liters, it becomes very, very uncomfortable for the child. Also, if you use them for prolonged duration, it can damage your nasal mucosa. If you are not using humidified oxygen, then it can lead to mucosal drying as the direct jet is going inside your nose. Also, the FiO2 through nasal prongs is very, very inaccurate and inconsistent. Now, another very similar looking thing which we use in children is heated humidified high flow nasal cannula. So it is still a nasal cannula. So the word nasal cannula is still there, but it is heated and humidified. So once you heat the air and get it humidified as well, then it gives you an advantage that you can now use higher flow rates. So once you are using heated humidified high nasal flow cannula, you can go up to 2 liter per kg per minute. So while you are using this nasal cannula, you are using only 2 liter per minute. But when you are using heated humidified high flow nasal cannula, you can go up to 2 liter per kg per minute. So in a child who is less than 12 kg, you can go up to almost 24 liter per minute. In older children, you can go up to 50 liter per minute. So that is the advantage of using heated humidified high flow nasal cannula. So again, this is a pictorial representation of the same. You can see when you are using nasal cannula, there is more of oxygen, there is less oxygen and more of air is going inside the lungs. So the patient is ultimately receiving very less oxygen. But on the other hand, when you are using the similar looking circuit but connected it to a heated humidified nasal flow cannula, then patient is receiving more oxygen as you are using more flow rates and less of the room air. So patient is getting maximum oxygenation. Another device which we use particularly in children is oxygen hood. This is nothing but a plastic box which covers the head of the infant, and it is used to deliver oxygen to babies under 1 year of age. It cannot be used in adult or the older children. The advantage of this device is that it's a high flow device and it ensures very adequate and stable FiO2 delivery. However, you have to use higher flow rates of 6 to 10 liter per minute. Now, another thing commonly used in older children and adolescent babies is oxygen mask. So there can be simple face mask or the Venturi mask, which used to deliver up to 60% of the oxygen. So there are different color interfaces are present, which codes for different flow rate, which can be permissible through these interfaces. So while the blue can deliver 2 to 4 liter per minute, white can deliver up to 4 to 6 liter per minute. Similarly, yellow, red, green. So the green you can achieve a maximum flow rate of 12 to 15 liter per minute. So the higher the flow rate, higher will be the FiO2 delivery. In some hospitals or in some ward, the Venturi mask can come in this form also, where there is a regulator. There is a single regulator. No different color coding is required. But while you move this regulator, you can achieve different flow rates and which will deliver different level of FiO2 to the patient. Now, oxygen mask is a very good device. Advantages are that it provides a very fixed and reliable FiO2 delivery. Also, you can deliver nebulization. So if you use hood or the nasal prongs, you have to remove those prongs or the nasal cannula if you want to give nebulization to the patient. So here through mask, you can give nebulization without disrupting the oxygen supply. The disadvantage is that it is difficult to fix very snugly. It keeps hanging very loosely. Also, it interferes with feeding. So if the child want to drink water or have his meals, then you have to remove this mask, and for that duration, the child will become hypoxic. Also, you cannot deliver very high FiO2. What we learned was that it can be used to deliver 24 to 60% of the oxygen, but not 90-100% of the oxygen. And for these regions that it cannot be fixed snugly, it interferes with feeding, it is not a very good device or a very suitable device to be used in neonates. Now I am sure this is one of the most commonly used, or I should say the most misused device in the COVID wards. So we are all are using this non-rebreathing mask. So this is again a mask, but the critical word is non-rebreathing. So why this word is there? Because you don't breathe in the same system. And why it is possible? Because this mask contains valves. Okay, so there are two valves here and one valve is here, which you cannot see. Okay, so what do these valves do? Because of these valves, the air move in a particular direction. Okay, so once you exhale, the air does not go inside this bag because there is a valve here which prevents the entry of air into this bag. Okay, so all the air is escaping through this valve. And once you inhale, you cannot inhale through mask because these valves get closed and this valve now gets open. So all the oxygen is going into this bag. So the idea is once you put the patient on this system, then the patients are directly breathing from this bag. So if this bag is full, the patient is, what is patient getting? He's getting full oxygen. So 90 to 100% oxygen this mask can deliver, right? So the thing is that you have to keep a high flow rate, 10 to 15 liter per minute. So, or at least the flow should be enough to keep this bag full. So if this bag is not full, this bag is remaining collapsed, then it means that you are not delivering enough flow rate. What is the disadvantage? If this device is so good, what is the disadvantage of this device? The only disadvantage is that it cannot be used to titrate oxygen delivery. You know, when I take rounds in the ward, many residents or the nurses tell me the patient is on a non-rebreathing mask and we have reduced the flow from 15 to 12 liters, so the patient is better. No, you cannot use these flow rates to titrate. As long as the patient is breathing from this, he's getting 100% oxygen. Okay, so whether you reduce the flow from 15 to 12 to 10, as long as this bag is getting filled, the patient is getting 90 to 100% oxygen. Okay, so if you actually want to titrate oxygen, you actually want to reduce the amount of oxygen the patient is getting, then you need to change your oxygen delivery device. You need to put in on either prongs or the nasal cannula or the high flow nasal cannula.